Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we are back again. I'm now going to do a review of The Flash, the Season 6 review. As we all know, this season was affected by the COVID-19. It was originally set to have 22 episodes but was cut down to 19 episodes following the outbreak, and this was something that affected all of the CW shows. So this is something I've noted down and will kind of take into consideration when I'm doing these reviews, but we'll overall concentrate on the episodes that did air and the particular arcs that they went through on here. So this will be a spoiler filled review, so if you haven't caught up with all of the episodes throughout the season, I would advise you to stop watching now, go away, catch up with the season, and then come back and watch this review. So the original setup for the sixth season was that it concentrated primarily on the pending crisis. We knew that was hinted within the first season of The Flash, if you remember, when Flash went into the Gideon System and he saw the kind of forecast of the newspaper outbreaks, and that was kind of a running overall theme that he used throughout the whole series. So as viewers, we were wondering when that was going to come to fruition. So that's what they kind of brought forward for this sixth season, when it was going to happen. We all remember at the end of season 5, I believe, it had Nora's message towards Barry, and the overall arc here was that Barry was going to have to save everybody during a crisis, but that would result in his pending death. So that's what the characters were kind of looking forward to, and how they were going to avert that event, and if they weren't, what was Barry going to do? He was reflecting on his life in terms of his future with Iris and all his friends and his loved ones, and how he's going to sacrifice himself. We also had the Bloodwork arc, where we had a character called Dr. Ramsey Russo, and he wanted to use the dark matter to cure patients following the death of his mother. His motivation was that he felt his mother had given up on herself when she realised she was going to die, and what was driving his purpose was that he felt he could cure patients, and he didn't want to give up on people who had terminal illnesses, and he wanted to cure them. And he would later go on to try and use this cure that he felt he had developed on metahumans, and we later on realised that he would kind of succumb to the kind of dark matter, and he would become completely consumed and use it for his own devices. We also had the return of the Harrison Wells, yet another version. This was kind of much more of a adventurer type of Wells version on here. You know, he wasn't as extroverted as what we had in the previous season in terms of Sherlock, but he was one who was a lot more versed in tech, and that was much more of a valuable asset, I felt, to the Team Flash. We also had Ralph, and the fact that he was searching for this character called Sue, and we later on find out that her parents were involved in a blackmail scheme, and that she was really kind of a duplicitous kind of figure. She was primarily after herself, and she was normally tricking Ralph any way that she could, but there was a redeeming feature to her, and then we will find that out later on within the season. The other major arc throughout this season was, of course, the Mirrorverse arc. This involved Iris. She was investigating the black hole operation, and this involved investigating someone called Carver, and we later on find out that he had lost his wife during the partial accelerator event. That's the kind of key critical event running throughout the whole season. And we later on find out that Eva McCulloch was trapped in this mirror universe, and she used Iris to kind of help herself to transport out of that mirrorverse and get her revenge on her husband Joseph Carver. And that was really the driving force, if you like, about the last third of this overall season. So overall, what was good about this season? So I think what helped season 6 was that there was no season long villain. They kind of shortened it down to more serialized story arc. Many fans and viewers, we highlighted the problems that the show has had when you have a main season antagonist, and the dilemma you've got where you've got to sustain that threat level and that imposing nature of that villain throughout the 22 episodes. And a lot of the times you can feel the strain. It's hard to sustain the menace and the threat level that that villain has throughout that long 22 episodes. So I think what helped the Flash this time, they kind of chopped and had separate segments. So as I mentioned before, we had the Bloodwork arc at the beginning. That was around about 6-7 episodes, I believe. And then later on, we had also the Mirrorverse, which picked up the last 7 or 8 episodes. So in a way that can be good because it just shortens the season and it keeps the season freshened up. So a lot of the time when you deal with one villain, things can get a bit stale. And I think by doing this approach here, by having separate arcs, it just kept the show reinvigorated and kept the kind of narrative changing and mixed up elements and events very well. Also, what remains, and I think is a big feature throughout this whole season, is that all of the characters, they still remain very likable. You know, if you watch this show throughout the 5, 6 seasons, you're hugely invested in all these characters, and there's still that warm heart and chemistry and dynamic between them all. You know, I'm talking about Barry and Iris and Cisco and Joe and Caitlin. You know, they've all got that huge still likability about them, and I think that's vital. So regardless of what flaws or issues there are throughout the season, as long as you can retain that main chemistry between the characters, that's always going to keep you coming back and watching. And all the performances were still good and iconic. I don't think there was anyone within the original casting that kind of failed to live up to their character or did any disservice throughout on here. So the Bloodwork arc, I felt, was a good story and it had a good conclusion near the end with, I think, but primarily was two of the best episodes throughout the whole season. The Last Temptation of the Flash, and this involved really Ramsey now taking full control of the Bloodwork substance, the dark matter, and we saw in those two terrific episodes at the conclusion of this Bloodwork arc where he could kind of take control of Barry, and Barry had we had the dark flash and we saw the kind of dark matter blood taking over his face and everything, and it was really intense stuff. It was really good, kind of a thrilling edge to the season. It really was an exciting conclusion to the story arc, and it was really had on the edge of the seat. It was really good stuff on here, primarily before the crisis had come into the fray. So that was very good on here. And I think Iris's role, I know it's been a huge talking point throughout the whole series, the role of Iris Allen, and I think she gets a lot of flack unnecessary. And I know, again, the love interest tends to get hatred. We saw, if you refer to Arrow, the whole Elicity and the fact that Felicity as well, she got a lot of hate because what a lot of people don't like is when you have the love interest involved, it means that we get a shift away from the kind of superhero narrative and we go more into the relationship and the love antics, and people don't like that. They feel it bogs these shows down when you have these characters reflecting more on their feelings and their emotions. They feel that it can really slow the series down. So I think that's why Iris has got a lot of flack, and the show, to be honest, they've struggled over this following seasons to kind of find the defining role of Iris. In the beginning, she had the journalistic role, which I think is the best role for her. But as we saw later on, in particularly season 3 and season 4, they shifted her role more where she was kind of the leader, if you like, of the Team Flash. We saw her many times in Star Labs and she was kind of directing everybody and coordinating the Team Flash overall. I don't think that was an appropriate fit, primarily because unlike the other members, Iris has no specialised skill set in terms of science or technology or tactical strategy. So it didn't feel true to have her coordinating Team Flash. You could have had her a part of Team Flash, but to have her at the forefront and directing everybody, it didn't kind of ring true. So they shifted her focus back more to the journalistic personality, and I think that was a better fit. And this came to fruition very much so in terms of the Mirror arc, which she really was the beginning kind of component where we saw her investigating the McCulloch Industries and the black hole operations. And again, they kept her involved in the fact that she was trapped in the Mirrorverse and she was trying to work her way with Eva and then work her way out of it. There was a critical point again because as that mirror universe developed, it was this whole point of trying to get Iris out of the mirror universe. We had that good story arc again when we knew we had the kind of doppelganger of Iris, and in the beginning she was kind of against Barry and questioning his faith and his dedication to their relationship, and overall Barry found out that she wasn't Iris. So that was a good, interesting development. So I think Iris was a lot more involved throughout this season, so I felt they did a good job, and I think Candice Patton, she acted very well within that role. So good use of Iris this type around on here. So again, I think the use of serialized shorter story arcs not having the overarching villain. We all know that season 5 struggled massively with the whole Cicada arc. You know, Cicada, without question, one of the worst villains of the entire series. So I think the writers, they learnt from that. They listened a lot to viewers who weren't very happy about the way that the villain role was treated within season 5. So the shortened story arcs, in particular with the Bloodwork and the Mirrorverse, was a better strategy, if you like, of handling the villains throughout the season. So we're now going to go over the bad points. Now, despite the fact that I felt that the Bloodwork and the Mirrorverse were better approaches in terms of shorter story arcs, this season as a whole, it just felt a bit ordinary overall. Despite the fact we had some standout episodes, I just felt overall there was a lack of real imposing, impactful storytelling without. There were a lot of episodes in between that just kind of felt filler. I know there was one or two that centered on Cisco, and I believe we had the whole story with he went into some sort of alternate reality, and again they struggled to get a grip on Cisco. He wanted his powers, he didn't want his powers. There was a whole gypsy storyline, if you remember, and it just, I don't know, they struggled sometimes to to focus on Cisco, you know, who primarily has been the heartbeat, that kind of upbeat, spirited kind of character on here, but he's been a bit of a more miserable personality throughout on here, and I think it hasn't worked with the character as well. There's also the fact that I think the Mirrorverse arc, it dragged on for too long. I think had they kept the Mirrorverse arc primarily to 2 or 3 episodes, that would have been fine, but it encompassed the final third of the whole season. That was really dragging its feet, and it was struggling to kind of stay important or stay pivotal, I think, to the overall season. There were times when it lacked a certain momentum, and we had the whole thing when Iris and Barry, there were tensions throughout, and you know, it took a while for Barry, or it took a while for them to reach the realization that Barry realized that Iris wasn't who she was, and I think they took a bit of too much time to get to that point. I really would have preferred if they got to that stage a lot sooner, and I think maybe had they resolved this arc a lot earlier, it might have left a lot more space to introduce another villain throughout on here. Other issues that I had was that the newer characters, we had Sue, I think we had Chester involved, and we had Allegra. All of these characters were just meh. I just think they were just filler throughout, and they didn't really add too much. Again, the Sue character, I didn't mind her in terms of the actress or in terms of the performance, but I just felt she was involved too much. And again, I just saw her as somebody who gave Ralph something to do. You know, again, his abilities and his powers are an important asset to the Team Flash, but sometimes I've just felt it was used to deviate away. Again, this whole thing about him having to investigate her and then later on protect her from this overall scheme and find out more about her parents, it just felt unimportant. I just felt it was taking time that we didn't need on here. And I think overall, in terms of Team Flash, again, for me, I just think now there are just too many team members of Team Flash. This is something I felt for the last couple of seasons, that, you know, originally when we started out with the show, the primary group was, of course, Barry, Iris, Joe, Caitlin, Cisco, and of course the original Wells. And I felt this was a sufficient amount of lineup in terms of their capabilities, in terms of their skill set, what they could do. I felt this was enough, that you didn't need any more. But of course we've expanded that way over now. So of course now we've got Cecile now, who can read people's minds. We've got Ralph. We've got Allegra with her own powers. We've got Chester now. We've got Sue now involved on here. You know, we've got Camilla as well now, of course, who has a relationship with Cisco. So it's just too many. It's just too many, and they all know who Barry is. They all know his secret identity. And I think what happens is when you have too many people within Team Flash and they've all got superpowers, it diminishes his Barry's role. Because if you think about it, the fact that Caitlin's got Killer Frost and Cisco, of course, could breach. You've got Wells with his technological knowledge. Ralph can able to reach long distances with his elastic powers on here. Cecile can read minds as well. So it kind of at times throughout the season felt Barry wasn't important. He wasn't as essential. Every time they took on a certain villain, you kind of felt that they could actually beat the villain without Barry. They didn't really need Barry as they took on each antagonist, and that of course goes against the very nature of any show, that you shouldn't diminish the role of your lead character. So I just think there are too many members within Team Flash, and I hope that going forward for season 7, whenever we do get it, they can just cut down on their members involved. I just think there are too many on here. We don't need. You could at least cut out 4 or 5 from the team show dynamic, and it wouldn't have any worse impact within the show. So I think that's something they really need to feel like going forward on here. So overall, I just think the show is just lacking a bit now, and it feels like they're lacking a bit of ideas, lacking a bit of creativity, despite the fact that Flash has had this, significant amount of rogues gallery, which I never felt they've utilised. He doesn't have the rogues gallery on the same level of Batman or Spider-Man, of course, but if you think we go through the villains, whether it's Captain Cold, Heatwave, Mirror Master, The Top, Gorilla Grodd, Captain Boomerang, he's got a significant amount of villains, and I never felt that they fully maximised the use of those throughout, these long-running episodes of seasons that he has. And it's just something that they really need to think about going forward for season 7 and season 8. They really need to work harder on building up these villains, building up these antagonists, and making them just have a much more significant impact throughout the season. Again, another bad point as well is just Harrison Wells. Now, we all love Tom Cavanagh, and he is a very versatile actor. But, again, another Wells, did you really need that? Again, another version. Again, they had that dynamic when he was having visions of the other Wells. They never really built too much on that. They never really developed that idea even further. So, do we really need another Wells at this point? And you can appreciate that Tom Cavanagh, he doesn't want that more, if you like, streamlined, straightforward role. He likes playing these extroverted, multiple characters. We saw that a lot, to some annoyance, if you like, with season 4 when we had the multiple Wells to begin with, and then we saw Sherlock later on. But at this point, do we really need another Wells again? It's just kind of becoming a repetitive trick that's kind of outlived its appeal or its usefulness as well on here. In terms of the Crisis, we all know that the Crisis on Infinite Earths had a significant impact on all the shows. It did a decent job of handling it. I don't think it affected the show too much as went into the latter stages. So it did a decent job of integrating the Crisis, if you like, post the major crossover event. So if I had to give a rating for this season, unfortunately I had to give it a 6.8 out of 10. It wasn't bad. It was definitely an improvement over season 5, without question. I think season 5 overall was one of the worst seasons of the season, but I just think there's still room for more. There's still room for more creative impetus and better use of the villains, better use of the story arcs. And if we can just cut down on the team members in Flash and really cut down on this idea of everybody knowing Flash's identity, and if we could just get back to a much more of a focused season where we utilise primarily on the original group of characters and build up a better momentum throughout the storylines, then I think that will put the show in better shape going forward for season 7. So those are my thoughts overall on the 6th season of The Flash. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you think it was an improvement over the 5th season, or did you think it was still lacking elements and maybe it's a step down? What do you think of the series overall? Do you think The Flash can go on for season 7, season 8? Can it possibly get to a 10th season? We know that the CW, it likes the established shows and likes to continue them on as much as possible. We saw with Arrow getting to season 8. Smallville, of course, got to season 10. Supernatural, amazingly, somehow got to 15 seasons. So, do you think The Flash can go on and maybe get it to 10 seasons, or do you think they're kind of running low now and maybe the 7th or 8th season should be the last? But those are my thoughts for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at short distances, and I will see you very soon.